Hello and welcome to this Facebook Live at thewire.in. Today, Monday, is the first full working day since that historic, dramatic press conference by 4 senior judges of the Supreme Court in Delhi. This was the press conference, in a way, led by Justice J. Chalameswar, in which he was accompanied by Justices Ranjan Gogoi, Syrian Joseph, and Madan B. Lokur. These are the 4 senior-most judges after the Chief Justice, where they essentially raised the issue of the selective assignment of cases to benches by the Chief Justice. And ever since they went public with their grievance, with their criticism of the way the Supreme Court has been functioning, it's fair to say that the entire country has been debating what's happening in the state of the judiciary in general and in the functioning of the Supreme Court. Political parties have recognized how momentous this press conference is, but I suspect are wary of plunging too deep into the controversy. The executive, to my mind, was probably quite stunned by what the 4 judges said, but under our constitutional scheme of things, the executive also has no role to play, although it is my sense that the crisis in some way has been triggered by ongoing efforts to disturb the balance between the executive and the judiciary through a variety of means. Be that as it may, we are fortunate to have with us today Avani Bansal, advocate, Supreme Court, legal scholar, legal analyst. You've been writing and commenting extensively, not just on the current crisis, if I can call it that, but more widely on legal issues.
That's right.
And I wanted to, there's been a lot of discussion and commentary on what the judges said and what may have motivated them. There's been a counterattack of sorts from people who have questioned why the judges had to break their silence if they had grievances of this kind. Some in the media have attempted to portray this as a political conspiracy. And there is, of course, a great deal of concern within the bar as to how this matter can be resolved. We've seen the Supreme Court Bar Association and the Bar Council of India making statements, not always saying the same thing, but nevertheless, it seems that everybody's anxious that this matter be resolved somehow. If I were to look at dominant narratives in the media and by media commentators, there seems to be a concerted effort to present this as purely an administrative dispute and one that does not have any wider implications. Although the fact that Justice Chalameswar said that if this crisis is unresolved, democracy in India may be at stake, and he said history wouldn't forgive us. So he was clear in his mind that this is not simply a minor administrative matter having to do just with the functioning of the court, but a lot of other issues get connected to this. So now that we are 4 days on from there, we know that there's discussion about having a meeting of the full court and the Bar Association, Bar Council, all trying to resolve this matter. AG himself has said, don't worry, things will be settled in a few days. Let's start by getting your sense of how things can play out from now. Clearly, there are various options, or maybe there aren't any, but what's your take on how this matter can proceed, from here on?
Right. Siddharth, even in the last 2 minutes that you sort of gave a debrief on what the issues are, it's very clear to anybody who's listening, and I think everybody is listening on this issue, that there are several layers and nuances of what's happening here. I, for one, if you were to ask me what's the one word you would define what's happening, I would say it's a question of trust and faith in the judiciary. Now, this is not something that's easy to pin down. It cannot have, by the very virtue of the issues involved at stake, any easy solutions. So I want to take a minute or two and say, what are the broader issues we're dealing with? And then also pinpoint and say, is there something specific we can do about it? Because, in today's news-hungry world, these things may come up. And even when the topmost 4 senior judges come out and say that this is an extraordinary event, this has never happened in the past, and hopefully will never happen in the future, it has gravity that is, hard to soak in. So, of course, first of all, it's no surprise to me that there will be all kinds of views on the table. It's very difficult for common people who are far away from the Supreme Court, both literally and figuratively, to understand, the context of where this is coming from. So the first thing I would say is, this back and forth between different judges has been going on in the Supreme Court for a while. So these developments have been sort of, it's been an ongoing process for the past few months. Anybody who's in the corridors of the Supreme Court, it's no surprise to us. what is very important is that the judges came out and said that we have tried, we wrote a letter to the CGI, and it has not been resolved. And what we think is at stake here is the responsibility with which the highest judges in the highest court, here specifically the Chief Justice of India, has been managing the affairs of the court. Now, I think, for one, the issue is that, see, judiciary, unlike the legislature and the executive in the country, don't have the power of the purse or the sword. The faith that people have in the judiciary is what gives it its power. Now, when there are questions about the integrity and impeccability of the highest judicial office, that is the Chief Justice of India, I think we all ought to be concerned. Now, why is it that I think there's a problem with the way this narrative is being framed? For one, it was said, that these 4 judges are against the 20 other judges who have not come up and spoken on the issue, which I think is a complete twisting of facts. See, we know how system works, and we know that if the top senior most judges, the top 4 senior most judges feel that there is something rotting in the system, they could do something about it. I mean, they wouldn't have probably called a conference and made it look like a conspiracy with the other 20 judges. They thought, they should speak about it. It's not 1 or 2, it's 4 judges.
Including Ranjan Gogoi, who is next in line to be chief.
Thank you for pointing that out, because what they're saying is that you need to keep the powers of the CGI in check.
Yeah.
What powers specifically are we talking about? We're talking about the powers to be a master of roster, deciding which case, constitutional case, goes to whom. Now, Ranjan Gogoi, especially being the next CGI in line, when he takes up power and he has gone public with it, he's not just talking about the current CGI, he's also talking about diluting his own powers.
That's right.
To your question about what goes forward, I think what the judges have done is they have called for a public trial. They have said there's something happening in the system, people need to be aware of it. Could they have done it any other which ways? People are saying they could have probably gone to the President of India. Now, with all due respect to the President of India and his office, again, we do know that there are political linkages, and this being a political hot topic could have been problematic. What people have said is, you need to know the truth. We think there's something problematic. What did the judges specifically ask for? They've asked for a higher standard of scrutiny. Now, scrutiny of what? Of a variety of things, but most importantly and specifically, and I think this point shouldn't be lost in sort of, the various issues we are seeing, is who decides what cases are assigned to anybody. Now, let's come on it from a legal perspective. The CGI has gone ahead and said that he is the master of the roster. There is no denial. But let us not forget that Article 14 of the Indian Constitution, right to equality, means that everybody is equal, there cannot be discrimination, and the basic principles of constitutional morality cannot be done away with, no matter who is the person in charge, which means, simply put, that the Chief Justice of India is also not above Article 14. A practical way forward is that there should probably be a group of 2 or 3 judges, the senior most judges, who should be made in charge of managing what matters are assigned, rather than pinpointing it to one individual.
So you're saying the power of being master of the roster comes with great responsibility.
Absolutely.
And in a way, it's perhaps the case of the 4 judges, without questioning the power of the CGI, that power has not been used in a responsible fashion.
Absolutely. Now, there have been news saying, listen, in the past, different matters of serious importance went to different judges, and so what about it?
Yeah, in fact, many of the, shall I say, apologists, if I can put it that way, of the current system,
right,
not taking any names here, but critics of the 4 judges are saying that, well, what's the big deal? Earlier 2 junior judges or junior benches got important cases, and the 2 cases that are mentioned, 2G going to Justice Singhvi,
right,
and Cole going to Justice Madan Lokur, who was then a so-called junior judge.
Right.
What's your counter to that? How is that different from what the 4 judges are raising now?
That's very, very important to highlight. What's different in today's situation is that we have a case where there is a matter involving, we're talking about, the suspicious circumstances under which Justice B.H. Loya died. Justice B.H. Loya was presiding over a special sessions court in Nagpur, and he was looking at the matter which involved, people like Amit Shah. Now the
special CBI court.
Special CBI court. Now, he died under extremely suspicious circumstances. His post-mortem report, if we were to read that, is sort of, full with a lot of suspicion. So a judge
and his family members have gone public with their fears.
Absolutely. The fact that Caravan, when opened the news, it became big and everybody's been talking about it. The next person who takes over the matter, sets a lot of people free, including Amit Shah. Now, this matter, the question is, okay, if there was if there needs to be investigation about whether whether there was fair trial, whether the inquiry was done properly, which is the right judicial forum to preside or supervise the Sessions Court. Now, legally speaking, it is the High Court's prerogative to supervise the functioning of a lower court. That's not a power that's granted to Supreme Court. So a group of lawyers took this matter to the Bombay High Court and said that there should be special investigation. This matter is pending before the Bombay High Court. Now here things become serious because the Supreme Court says, and different judges and their role have been questioned, when the Supreme Court says that we want to take over this matter, and once the Supreme Court takes over the matter, then anything that the High Court says becomes infructuous. So why are we having this exceptional situation in this particular case that involves people like Mishras? That's a very, that's a question of judicial propriety. So questions are bound to be asked that why is the CGI being selective in interfering or intervening in particular matters?
Just so I'm very clear here, is the suggestion that being made here that the lawyer matter was to be considered in the Bombay High Court, and somehow an attempt was made to preempt that by bringing it to the Supreme Court and then perhaps cherry-picking a bench?
Absolutely. Okay. So that's a suggestion. So we don't want to get into the merits of the case because that, of course, is...
So if the Supreme Court, if that bench were to dismiss this matter, then this closes the chapter even at the level of the High Court.
Exactly.
Okay,
so then the Bombay High Court would have nothing to say. So the question is not, the Supreme Court is the highest judicial body in the country. The reason we have so much respect for it and the reason there's so much anxiety today is because things have been working fine. Now, here, if there are individuals in the highest positions against whom, there are charges, not proved, but at least there are charges that they are involved in deciding which cases go to whom, then I think the simple thing to do to come out clean is to say, okay, why don't we have 3 or 4 senior most judges come around the table and decide the bench? Now, what I would do is that would send out a very loud message that there is nothing wrong, that everything is open to be, to transparency. But when individuals say that, no, this is my prerogative alone, even if there is nothing fishy, the perception that people get is that there's something wrong. And the thing about the judiciary, for that matter, justice, is that not only should the right things be done, they should also seem to be done. So the fact that we're not willing to open up this system of who decides to decide on which matter and limit it to one particular person alone is not a matter of just necessarily saying, oh, people have problems with the current CGI. It's a matter of laying down the right procedure.
And in a way, there are precedents when the Supreme Court considers issues that affect judges, right? There could be allegations or there could be things to do with judicial arrangements, right? There's the Anjak case, Justice Karnan's case, where the decision was taken that we will assign this to a large bench in which senior judges would be, would dominate in a way. And the fact that in the lawyer matter, it's perhaps the argument that was being made by the 4 judges was that if at all the lawyer matter is to be heard in the Supreme Court, maybe since it considers the judiciary, it shouldn't be assigned to a junior judge, but should actually be handled by the senior judges collectively.
Right. Yeah. And you point out something very important. See, I think it's important not to fool ourselves. After all, even the judges are individuals. So while any judgment comes out from the Supreme Court and it has a Supreme Court seal on it, we know at the end of the day, it is individual judges whose opinion, decides what is right or wrong in a particular matter. Now, in every position, I think there is an attempt, and I feel extremely unfortunate about this, that there is an attempt to say that, somehow judiciary is a holy cow now. It's a new holy cow, which means that anything that happens should be sorted inside the Supreme Court. People have gone on to say that, it's a family dispute. Now, I, for one, disagree with it, for the simple reason that I think that every citizen of this country has a stake in deciding what goes on inside the Supreme Court. So if there is a problem, and if the senior most judges have, taken such an extreme step, there are reasons to worry. And why should the common people, why should we be too worried about what common people have to say on something in a democracy? Isn't that the fundamental principle of democracy? So if there are individuals whose integrity is in question, then the right thing to do is to open it up and say, let's constitute a bench, let it not be one individual functioning, and let's test, who's in how much water.
This suggestion, I think, made by maybe the Bar Council, I don't know who made that let the full court meet. I mean, is that a way for, at one level that's also a way of resolving it within the family. But there does seem to be some merit in the sense that if the 26 judges or the full strength of the court, these are all first among equals, that maybe discussion among them could produce a solution?
See, I think that might be a way forward. But what I should say and clarify is that it's not either or. So we're not saying now tomorrow that there's going to be a referendum in which people of this country are going to vote about what the judges should do. That's not the point.
Right.
The point is that people have a right to know, which is what the judges have come out and said, this is what's happening. That doesn't mean that, now people are going to decide. But of course, people have a right to know. They have a comment. They have a right to debate as they're debating rightfully. Now, how it is resolved, I think, judges coming together and sitting down and coming up with a procedure. Now, let me, pinpoint what's been the center of attention. After the NJAC bill, there has been question about having a memorandum of procedure. You have any collegium meeting, you have anything, you need to have strict procedure because law, after all, is run on the basis of procedure. Such memorandum of procedure has not come. And there have been suggestions that, the government has not come up with any guidelines on it. So if the Supreme Court goes ahead with following a certain procedure for something, and then the government intervenes and comes and says, but this is a memorandum of procedure, how's that going to play out? So I think even moving forward...
But right now the bottleneck is from the executive, right? I think something...
It is from the executive.
A document was prepared by the court, but the centre hasn't cleared it yet.
Exactly. So the suggestion that was made by the 4 judges is that if the executive didn't say anything on it for a very long time, that silence should be either deemed to be consent because you can't be sitting on it forever. That stalls everything. So the question is lay down procedure. If the judges come together and say, here is the procedure, this is how, we are going to conduct our meetings, it's going to be transparent, there's going to be proper records of everything. And for anything, there's not going to be one individual responsible, there's going to be 3 or 4 individuals responsible. Then you have a memorandum of procedure, you go forward. How you come to this memorandum of procedure? Judges sitting together, the respected AG sitting together, government people sitting together, that's, getting into the technicalities. But having a memorandum of procedure is what the 4 judges have pointed out. That don't do things arbitrarily. I think the problem is arbitrariness in saying one individual gets to decide something.
Which is why the one case that they highlighted in their letter was the RP Lutra matter, where the MOP was at the center in a way.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and I think, nobody needs to become defensive in the process because, when you're raising questions, nothing is proved thus far. So it's not like, and I mean, there have been allegations, suggestions against the CGI, but nothing is proved. But I think the right way forward is, for the CGI to say and for all the judges to agree that, let's have ground rules, let's bring people on table and take this forward because that would be very transparent. And then the people who have a right to know would be able to see, okay, the right thing is being done.
As an advocate and as an observer of Supreme Court affairs, did it occur to you at the time when Justice Mishra overturned the Chalameshwar Nazir bench ruling that let a bench of 5 top judges consider the medical bribery scam?
Right.
Because the Chalameshwar bench wanted to broad base.
Right.
The bench to ensure that there were no conflicts of interest here.
Right.
And when the Chief Justice with great alacrity overturns that, did it appear to you then that this was likely to snowball into something major?
You're right. I mean, and I think that was a trigger point because the question is, if there are suggestions that a particular judge is involved, including the CGI, in some way in the matter, then I don't see why there should be any reservation in opening up and saying, and by the way, Justice Chalmeshwar or Justice Gogoi are not saying that give the matter to us and we want to be presiding the matter. They're only saying, why don't we, form a larger constitutional bench? Let the constitutional bench decide. So when the CGI comes in and says, but I am the master of roster and I decide, who it goes to in a matter where, there have been questions on me, then that does not send the right message to people.
Exactly. And it's a fundamental violation of the idea that no man should be a judge
in his own cause.
Which is such a fundamental precept of law. We are used to, you've studied in the United States and the UK, but in the US one is used to seeing the politicized nature of judicial selection, right? Where presidents don't make any bones about the fact that they settle on a particular judge. Of course, the judge then has to clear, there is a hearings process, and but it's an open secret that whether it's Obama or Trump or Clinton or George W. Bush, they settled for particular judges based on an estimate of what their political leanings and overall orientation would be.
Right.
In India, that idea is anathema in some way, right? The idea that you could formally go through a process where you are cherry-picking judges based on the kind of verdicts they're likely to deliver, right?
You're right. See, in India, traditionally, the scheme that we adopted in our constitution suggests that no judge should, take up a matter in which he or she is directly interested. Now, it is no secret, and ask any common person on the street, they all know that judges will have their political leanings. That's all right. But the moment a particular judge is too keenly involved with a political party or has had any direct connection with a particular case, the practice has been over the years that they would recuse themselves from the matter. Here, the question, I think, became very serious because when there were questions, raised about the CGI being involved himself, instead of recusing himself, he said, I'm going to decide who gets to do this matter. So even if there was nothing to prove against him, that didn't send the right signal. So I think in India, we adopted a system where we say, that judges should not necessarily directly have anything to do with any political party. And if there are allegations, and the best thing for the right perception is not to be on that particular bench.
Correct. I was actually looking also at the issue of the question of judge selection, right? And if in the US judges are selected on the basis of their views, here you have a collegium system. The government early in its tenure, Modi government, tried to upend the collegium system by pushing through the National Judicial Appointments Commission. Many people welcomed aspects of it, and we know that the bench itself was divided. Justice Chalameshwar, for example, famously dissented with the Supreme Court verdict on which struck down NJC. But what was clear about, or the one big difference that the NJC was introducing was giving the executive much more of a say by way of veto power over the selection of judges. And many were kind of uncomfortable with this idea that a government could then say, fine, a judge is selected who was otherwise very good, but we fear that on some issue he may vote against us or she may vote against us, so let's not have them on the bench. And to give the executive that kind of authority was widely seen as something that would be quite dangerous, which is not to say that the collegium system should not be reformed. And I think there is widely a consensus, and a lot of the debate on the MOP also revolves around the fact that the collegium needs to be more transparent in its functioning. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. That, see, amongst differences of opinion on how judges need to be appointed, I think there is at least a consensus on a few basic principles. Now, what are the things on which I think there is broadly a consensus? First of all, that there needs to be transparency. That it can't be something that a few people get together and decide without any procedure, without maintaining records.
They don't even maintain minutes.
Exactly. So it cannot happen so arbitrarily. It cannot happen behind closed doors, so to say. So that's something that I think everybody across the board is on agreement with. How much role should the government have to play in this process, and where do you peg it? I think that's a fine line where the debate is. Now, I personally find it extremely paradoxical that the government, which was so hungo about having a very strong say in who should be the next judge, which means, by the way, if the NJC bill does come into picture, we are making a slight departure. We are moving the US way. Not completely, but we're not saying now this is something only the judges decide. We're saying the government should have some role to play. And after all, if the three branches work in good faith, why are we so apprehensive about who the government will appoint? But after this entire controversy, I think the stand of the political party, the ruling political party, and the government has been that this is entirely a matter of the judges. Now, mind you, it's coming from a matter, the trigger point has been where Mishras has been involved. So you say, if on this particular issue, we don't want to have any say, but when it comes to judges' appointment, we want to have a very strong say. Now, I see that there is a contradiction there. So I think the common point should be that transparency should be brought in the process, right from the appointment of judges to who decides what matters are assigned to whom. And the best thing to do is, keep the judiciary empowered, because after all, I don't think the government should have an upper hand in deciding who the judges should be. The government definitely should have a few stakeholders on board, but the key really is opening up. As long as we keep it to a small circle, you're giving chances for corruption to prevail. And forgive me for saying this, Siddharth, but I'm a first generation lawyer. I'm a new entrant in the field, and I feel that a lot of people who are saying, this is judiciary, we should decide this matter, are privileged people. They are people who are at the top of the game, which means there is something in for them for continuing to keep things the way they are. But everybody who's a new entrant, people like me who come to the Supreme Court, we're all up for opening up the system. So I think there is that dynamic playing out, that if we minutely look at who are the people who are saying, let's keep it within the family, because you are the family and you are apparently the head of the family, so you wouldn't want the privilege to go away. And all the youngsters who are coming and saying, what's the problem with having everybody on board, making it a transparent system, are people who don't necessarily have that privilege.
On that note, Avani, Bansal, we will leave it there.
Thank you so much.
very kind with your time, and I think thank you for your insights on this.
Thank you so much.
It's been 4 days, as I said, since the four judges held that dramatic press conference. We are, to my mind, no closer to a resolution of the issues that they raised. There's enormous pressure to paper over these differences and to somehow come up with some kind of a patch-up solution. But in going to the public in the dramatic manner that they did, I think the judges were appealing to a wider universe, a wider canvas, and trying to convey the sense that issues which they are confronting in the functioning of the Supreme Court are not simply administrative matters, they're not simply internal matters, but they concern the essential aspect of democracy in India. And it's in the interests of the future of democracy in India that the issues that they raised get resolved in a way that the public can have faith in the functioning of the judiciary and have faith in the Indian legal system being the one door they can knock on when their rights are infringed. Thank you very much for watching.